Sam, do you prefer the remarks in Spanish or English?
Whatever your preference is, maybe both. I don't know. We'll have folks join right now.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're glad to have you here for the Foundations of ESPC training for Puerto Rico. My name is Sam Kramer, and I am a Senior Program Director with the National Association of State Energy Officials, or NASEO. We're really excited to have you here on this training. There's a lot of good information that we're going to be ready to present to you, and you're going to learn a lot about the fundamentals of energy savings performance contracting and what it is and how you can leverage it in Puerto Rico to make needed improvements to your own facilities. Joined here, we have our trainer, Chris Halpin, who is with the Energy Services Coalition. He's had 30 years of experience working alongside ESCOs and various other organizations related to ESPC, and is happy to provide his experience today. And we also have Jesse Ray Cortez, who is with Johnson Controls, who is going to be talking to us about some case studies with ESPC from an island perspective. And we also have Angel Rodriguez Velez of the Puerto Rico Energy Office, who is going to provide us with some opening remarks. So before we get started with our training, I have a couple quick housekeeping announcements. If you do have questions for our trainer or for Jesse, please make sure to put them in either the Q&A or the chat box at the bottom of your screen. And we'll be able to read those out at the end of each of their presentations when we have time for Q&A at the end of the training. With that said, I'd like to turn things over to Angel to get us started with some opening remarks from the Puerto Rico Energy Office.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Let me say this in English first. My name is Angel Rodriguez. I am the operational manager of the Energy Office in Puerto Rico. I want to welcome you all to attending this important seminar in terms of to know better what is energy service performance contracting. That's our office is looking to working allow the different government agencies to implement as energy savings to achieve our goal. Some kind of different structure that we used to do in the past. And so we are going to see what the first hand with Jesse Wright, some case study that his company performed here in Puerto Rico. So, this is in Spanish. Gracias a todos por estar presente. Mi nombre es Ángel Rodríguez. Yo soy gerente de operaciones de la Oficina de Política Pública Energética. Le doy la cordial bienvenida. Este adiestramiento es de suma importancia. Estamos comenzando a trabajar con lo que se llama los Energy Savings Performance Contract. Es un concepto nuevo. Por lo menos para aquí, para Puerto Rico, no así para Estados Unidos. Así que es algo que vamos a estar dándole apoyo a las agencias de gobierno en la implementación de esta iniciativa para reducir los costos operacionales. Sin nada más, pues entonces los dejo también dándole las gracias a NASEO, National Association of State Energy Officials, también dándole las gracias también a la Energy Service Coalition, por la oportunidad y lo que nos están próximo a presentar. También gracias a Jesse Wright de JCI, el cual es un facilitador también en esta iniciativa. Gracias a todos y espero que podamos sacarle mejor provecho a esta iniciativa. Gracias. Go ahead, Sam. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Angel. And again, we're looking forward to a good hour and a half here of learning and training here. So right now, before we get started, I just want to turn things over to our trainer, Chris Halpin. Like I said, he has years of experience working with the ESCOs and in the energy savings performance contracting world. And he is here to share his expertise with you and provide you key information. And just so you know, we also will be recording this training. So if you do want to send this along to other interested persons in your offices to learn more, we're happy to send the link around once we are done with this training. So with that said, I'd like to turn things over to Chris to provide us with the training. Chris, can you hear me? Chris, you're coming through on mute. You may be muted twice.
Yeah, I've unmuted myself.
Perfect. We can hear you now.
Can you hear me now? Okay,
Yes.
great. All right. Thank you, everyone. Muchas gracias. First of all, I wish I spoke more Spanish than I do. I have a new daughter-in-law from Lima, Peru, so I'm trying to learn more and more Spanish as time goes on. So anyway, I'm glad to be here today. As Sam has said, I've been in this energy efficiency industry for decades. I started actually in Florida, doing a lot of work in South Florida, Central Florida, and North Florida back in the 1980s. So I started in 1985 doing energy efficiency consulting, and I've also worked for NASEO. So I've built these projects and sold these projects back in the 90s, and then I've been working as an owner's rep and a project facilitator for local governments and the US federal government for 23 years. I had my own firm for almost 20 of those years, Celtic Energy, sold that to a big engineering firm, and now I'm back out on my own again, helping ESC, Energy Services Coalition, and NASEO spread the word on how to use performance contracting well, so that places like Puerto Rico, which really needs to get a lot of work done, especially with the hurricane, many hurricanes, I'm hoping to actively as possible. So with that, I'll go to the next slide. There we go. So you probably have heard this before. Another thing, so there's going to be a lot of language and words on these slides. I'm not going to talk about everything. I've put a lot in here so that when you go back to your offices after this, you'll have more to look at and try to remember what was said. All right. So the ESC is a national nonprofit organization with everyone from state energy officials to ESCOs to interested third parties like myself to try to foster the use of performance contracting in the state and local government markets. And we have a lot of local chapters that we try to utilize to get a lot of work done, a lot of education and outreach done locally to really make a big difference in each market that ESC helps. So what is this energy savings performance contracting? It's basically the use of guaranteed savings, right, which is something that's never really done in the construction industry, right? Anytime you build a new building, do a renovation, the architects, the engineers, the contractors, none of them guarantee anything really other than the 1-year warranty you get in the building, right? So with performance contracting, it's very different. You get guaranteed savings from the maintenance and operations budget, which including utilities, water, gas, oil, propane, especially on the island, you use a lot of diesel, a lot of propane, and use that as a way to amortize that cost over time. So you get to fix a lot of stuff, replace a lot of stuff, and finance it like you would do with a mortgage on a house or a car payment on a car, pay for it over time, as opposed to having to come up with cash, right? Which makes it much more palatable to a lot of public organizations. The thing about this that really makes it different than most, design, bid, build type construction you see in most public procurements, you're going to be spending this money anyway, right? You're going to be giving this money to the utility, right? And I know in Puerto Rico, that's been a big issue over the years with the former utility that got taken over and it's been changed hands a few times. It's been a big problem. So now you're going to be spending this money anyway. Why not we take this money out of the inefficiency of those buildings and reinvest it into those buildings instead of just handing it to the utility every day, all while reducing your carbon footprint, creating jobs. For me in Puerto Rico, resilience is number one, right? Because you're still a target for hurricanes and storms. We have to try to mitigate the horrible effects that are caused by these. And so, and again, I'm not going to read all this, but it's basically a cash neutral, budget neutral way of you to be able to take money, like I said, you're already spending, use a well-used finance mechanism that's been used all over the US. It's spreading around the world now. This is what's getting done in Ukraine and in Germany and other places in Europe to try to offset the purchase of Russian oil and gas, right? It's exploding over in Europe. So it allows you to pay for today's facility upgrades with tomorrow's energy savings, right? Without getting into your organization's capital budget, which is at a premium these days, right? I know that the way Puerto Rico gets funded from Washington, there's never enough money, right? Just like in most states here, there's never enough money. But done properly, for me, it has a way to perform like a hedge fund, right? You get really good returns, 10 to 20% in a hedge fund with the risk of a treasury bill, right? Which is about the least risky thing you can put your money into these days, right? So done properly, this is the best thing I have seen in public procurement in my 38 years of experience. So in order to customize this a little bit for you in Puerto Rico, I put a link in here for the enabling legislation and a few snapshots of it to show you that basically in 2015, the government there basically formalized some previous rules, put them into a very well done 37-page paper of policy guidance. That's honestly, from my opinion, I've seen dozens and dozens of these, one of the best ones I've seen in the US. So I think that you all have done a great job with this. A few takeaways for me out of this is that it gives Angel's office powers to coordinate and oversee the implementation of these projects and really help all of you that are on this webinar, right? This is key because I've been doing this for a long time in states here on the mainland, and without much guidance from the state agency, you have school districts and towns and counties doing this in all kinds of different ways. And honestly, they don't have the time nor the expertise nor the wherewithal to really do this the way it needs to get done. And a lot of bad projects happen, right? And then it's not good for anybody. It's not good for the marketplace. It's not good for the owners. It's not good for the ESCOs. So with the standardized process that's created through Angel's office, it makes for consistency in development, implementation, and measurement verification, which is one of the keys to success of this type of project, which we'll get into later. Another thing that's important here is you all have got an energy savings target of at least 30% or more across all buildings. The way things get done now, and it's the same here on the mainland, those targets will never be hit with standard, get capital into the budget, take 3 to 5 years for it to get approved. Then you hire a design engineer, get it built, no guarantees. You're never going to hit those targets. With performance contracting, you can hit those targets, right? This is getting done in Hawaii and California today, right? And they're doing it in a very fast clip to hit these targets. So the best thing out of all of this is it eliminates the risks that come with the ESPCs, which done properly with the right policy guidance and help from owners reps like me and others, you get to mitigate all that. But with having this office's SOEP's assistant, it's going to make this a lot easier and more effective and efficient. So one of the things that's different about this, it allows you to, like I said, package a lot of these measures. You have to do lighting, motors, air conditioning, boilers, new windows, all this kind of stuff that gets done in a performance contract. It doesn't provide the financing directly, right? Traditional performance contracting is the owner, say the school district or the town or the city, say the city of San Juan, puts out a contract to hire Jesse's company, another company, whatever the company might be. You still have to get financing for this. That's usually done in a separate transaction, right? You kind of get to know how much you think you're going to spend, put out the financial RFP, you hire the company, whatever bank, local bank, national bank, whatever it is that actually provides the money for this, right? So it's typically a 2-track process, but it allows you to do a competitive procurement that gives you an idea of how much all these ESCOs are going to charge you, again, done on an open book basis, when you finally do get to a final product, right? So it allows you to do multiple things with one procurement. For me, that's the beauty of this. I used to do this, like I said, when I started my career in Florida. We would do the design, put it out to bid. The town or the city always picked the lowest bid. And then we were fighting with the contractor the whole way through construction with change orders and all this, right? It becomes an adversarial relationship, which is not good for anybody, right? So this allows you to collaborate in a way where the contractor gets to do what's right, make a fair profit. The owner gets to state what I really need. The ESCO puts that into the contract documents and everyone works together, And because you have, and we'll go through this process later, because you go through a whole investment grade audit process together, you sort of co-author the solution. Then putting the drawings together, the plans and specs becomes easy, right? Because everyone has thought it through. Like design build, which I know goes on somewhat in Puerto Rico. This is sophisticated design build where you have a 20-year tail of performance for the ESCO, or 15 years in Puerto Rico, 15-year tail. So everybody has skin in the game, including the contractor, which is much, much different than most public procurement. So why would you think about doing this? Typically, it's because you don't have cash laying around, right? If you had a lot of money and expertise, you would just do this yourself. You have energy goals, that's 30% energy goal. You have environmental targets. You want to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions. You want to create local jobs, which is, really something that's needed anywhere in the Caribbean. You've got a lot of failing facility, need for resilience, and you need to leverage this stuff, right? It's hard to do it. And you saw it after Hurricane Maria, lots of great things got done on an ad hoc basis. There wasn't enough of a system-wide set of upgrades to really help you withstand the next big storm. This is a way to do it. So, like I said, if you have all the money, all the time and expertise, you can do this yourself, right? But almost nobody has any of that in the public. So what went on 30, 40 years ago when this was all started is like, I need stuff done. I don't have the time or money. Meets up with, boy, I have stuff that can save money, but you don't know if it's going to deliver the results. If I change my T8s to LEDs, yes, I know it's going to save me 30, 40%, right? My compact fluorescence even more. If I still have incandescents, it's going to be 90% savings. But I can't guarantee that to my boss. How am I going to be able to guarantee that? Because they're basically going to have to cut the electric budget, hoping that those savings are going to be there, right? So with performance contracting, allows you to take this budget neutral approach and say, all right, yeah, we're going to spend less on electricity, but we're going to have to pay the bank back for all the stuff that we're replacing, right? So you're going to put in better air conditioning, better lighting, better controls. All that money is going to be saved. The ESCO is going to guarantee those savings. So you can know when you get the bank bill every month, starting in 2 years, you'll be able to pay that bill because you're going to have that guarantee from the ESCO to go on, just like a collateral, right? When you get a loan for your house, you're putting up that house as collateral. Same with a car. You're using that ESCO's guarantee as collateral against that bank loan. There's a new thing that's come out that, again, you may or may not have seen this. It's sort of like performance contracting, but it includes the financing and it's energy. It's called energy as a service. So that's really where, if you don't want to even put any of this onto your books, you don't want to finance any of this, the ESCO will team up with a finance partner and do it all at once. It's almost like you're buying the heat, the cooling, the light, as opposed to the chillers and the boilers and the lighting, right? And we're not going to get into that now, but if it does come up, that's something, again, after this, feel free to reach out to me. I can explain it in more detail. So, and I've already talked a little bit about this, some other things that need to be thought about through this. This is a partnership, right? Like I said, you're going into this with the opinion and the perspective that I'm going to select the right group of people. It's not necessarily the company. Company's great. It's the people who are going to be working with you locally. The most important thing, you're picking a partner, not a project. Once you pick that partner, then you develop the project, right? It's all going to be done in a way that's going to be documented thoroughly, open book on the pricing, so that everyone knows going forward from the guys and gals that are wearing, the blue overalls working in the chiller plants to the CFO and the mayors of the towns. Everyone needs to know what's going on, right? And it's all going to be done in a way that's going to meet all the standards of your institution. All the standards of comfort that you're used to, right? 75 for cooling, 68 for heating, whatever it's going to be. The ESCO is going to need to make sure that gets done and capable. The systems are going to be capable of that. And you're going to work out roles and responsibilities for who's going to operate and maintain all of this equipment through the lifetime, right? It'll be written down in plain English and Espanol for everybody in the contract, right? And all of this needs to be done in a way that, like I said, the savings have to be there. You're guaranteed, the ESCO's guaranteeing that. You're guaranteeing that to the bank, right? Like I used to say, if your teenage son wrecks your car, you still have to pay the insurance on it and pay the bank on it, right? Just like what's happened to some of us. It's the same with an energy savings performance contract. That's why it's so important that everybody work together on one of these, right? And there's no change orders. It's guaranteed fixed price, unless the owner goes in and says, "Oh, we want to add a wing of this building. We decided we want to do this." The ESCO comes in. They do months and months of study, put together this report, and are guaranteeing that fixed price, whatever that is, or guaranteed maximum price. There's also a guaranteed minimum savings. So they're saying it's going to be a $10 million project. We're going to guarantee you $1 million a year. That's the minimum savings is going to be guaranteed. If they save more, if they save you 1.1, 1.2 million, that excess savings goes to the owner, right? Like I like to say, there's no rollover minutes in ESPC. And that's the ESCOs are usually happy with that, right? Because they know that they've made their money during the construction. The rest of it is monitoring, right? And we'll get into that later, right? So, and I won't get into too much of this, but we used to have to depend on just the financing to fund any of these things, right? That's why you're doing this, because you don't have any money, right? Is the most reason. Now, under the Biden administration, there's 2 laws that have been passed in the past 2 years that are absolute game changers for anything to do with energy projects. One is a bipartisan infrastructure law, and these are all live links. I won't go to them now. You can go to these afterwards. That got passed a year and a half ago, and it's putting $550 million into block grants that go to state energy offices directly, right? So that Puerto Rico is already getting a chunk, I don't know how much, based on a formula. And the same thing for schools. There's another $500 million going into schools, and a lot of that is competitive. Then there's also the Inflation Reduction Act. Now this is the big one. This is another order of magnitude. There's $369 billion of investments are going to be spent in this. This includes the most important part for I think for you in this is that it allows states and local governments to basically take direct payments from the Internal Revenue Service. Think about that. That's a joyous thing just on its own. Although you don't pay taxes, you can file. It's almost like filing a tax return with the IRS saying, we're going to put in the solar project, we're going to put in heat pumps, we're going to put in all these different things, battery storage, and you can claim 30% of that project cost, and it will get paid to you once the project is complete. It's like getting utility incentive, right? Once you finish the project, the utility will come out, look at it and go, "Oh yeah, you put in all these new motors and variable frequency drives. Here's your $100,000. The IRS will do the same thing, right? So this needs to be programmed into performance contracts. So there needs to be a bridge to finance during construction until it's completed, right? So, and again, we don't have time to get into the details of that, but this is something maybe follow up we can talk about some more. Then NASEO put together this great Inflation Reduction Act resource hub you can go to. And then this is for an outside third party, American Progress, how you can get benefits from this. Right, switching gears a little bit, some new solutions. So one of the things I want to talk about, again, I won't go through all of this in detail, but who owns the improvements, right? You get this done, you still own the improvements, right? You're putting in new boilers, new chillers, new lighting, you still own it, right? The bank, like anything with your house, they may have interest in it, right? Financial interest in it, but the title stays with you, right? The bank has security interest in it. So who owns the risk of the performance? Pretty much, depending on how these are written, it's like 90% the ESCOs, right? And 10% you. But when these deals go bad, it's mostly because the owners, people did not understand what their responsibility was and don't keep up with the maintenance that's required. Right? When I do a lot of forensic analysis for the federal government and state and local governments, and we often find that's the main problem. And again, like I said earlier, with a collaborative process, you need to make sure the folks who are going to be operating, maintaining these buildings understand what's going on. Right? I come from a family in New York where all of my uncles are steam fitters and carpenters and painters and all of this. Those are the folks that need to be brought into this from the beginning. Not just the engineers, not just the architects, not just the CFO, the people on the owner side who really are going to be working with this in the trenches. Then this will be successful. You make them part of the solution, this will be successful. So as long as we make sure that operations maintenance plans are written into this so that you understand what the ESCO is going to do, You understand what your staff is going to do. And if you have outside contractors that are maintaining things for you, that stuff needs to be written into their contracts. So you have an opportunity to rewrite maintenance contracts with third-party providers as part of this, or you can have the ESCO do the maintenance for you, right? And you cancel the contract with the existing provider, right? So there's a lot of different ways this can be done. And is the upfront financing debt? Yes, that is going to be considered debt on your books. So that's, again, another thing that your financial people need to understand when they're doing this. There's almost always non-appropriation clauses in this because this is public, right? Most public entities cannot guarantee anything for more than a year, right? 1 year, because it's annual appropriations. And I think Puerto Rico is the same way. And again, we put a link in here of what a standard non-appropriation clause is. So that means if you don't get the money to pay sort of your utility bills, right, which is very rare, you won't be paying this deal either, right? And again, we don't have time to get into details of that, but this is included in virtually any document. And Puerto Rico already has model documents that were created as part of this policy. So you're going to follow this SOEP process and their contract format. Same thing with termination. If things aren't going well, there's clauses in the contract where you can terminate during the ESCO's development of the audit that we'll talk about next, or during the performance period, right? During the, the 10 or 15 year period that everyone's keeping an eye on this, whether it's working or not, you can terminate the contract then as well, right? Again, you can look at the contract documents. We don't have time to get into that now, but it's usually for non-performance of the ESCO, or you've decided you're going to close the building, right? You may have a prison that you're closing, hospital that's getting changed or renovated. There are reasons for terminating contracts. You also want to make sure that, I talked about this earlier, you have all the stakeholders that are involved in this. If you're going to do a project like this, you can't have just your technical people. You can't have just your facilities and your operations and maintenance folks. Your legal people need to be involved. Your finance people need to be involved. And the budget people need to be involved, right? The budget people keep an eye on what gets spent every year, year after year after year. They have a plan. You need to make sure this money is in their plan. You also need to make sure the attorneys are involved from the beginning. Don't wait till you're 9 months into planning one of these out and then spring it on your attorney, right? As you probably have all experienced, they can stop one of these dead, right? In its tracks. The U.S. Veterans Administration stopped our whole program because one of their in-house attorneys didn't agree with it, right? So you need to make sure that's done up front. Oops, wrong one, next. Okay, so here's one of the, and I've already talked about this, but this is a good graphic about it. You want to assemble a team. You want to have an energy champion inside so that they understand how to do one of these projects, and they can get training like this and other types of training, and they can be the voice internally that helps manage the whole rest of the internal team, right? That includes legal, right? We call it cat herding, right? Trying to get attorneys to do anything, right, is not easy. Getting finance to participate from the beginning, right? So they have to know what's going on with this because you're putting a financial obligation in place when you do one of these projects. Same thing with procurement. You want to make sure your purchasing or your procurement departments are on board from the beginning. They can also stop one of these dead. They have veto power over a project like this. I've already talked about the operations and maintenance people. The construction folks, again, most construction departments and state and local governments are used to design, bid, build, right? We hire the architect, they design the plans and specs with the engineers, we put it out to bid, we build it, and then we fight with the contractor for a year or two over change orders and commissioning and punch lists and all that, right? Done properly, getting on board with the ESCO from the beginning, that all becomes a thing of the past, right? And everyone tries to help each other out because you get what you need, the ESCO gets to make a fair profit, and they get to use you as a reference, right? And you have a good experience and you're happy to talk to other people about using ESPC as a good project delivery vehicle. And oversight, right? Again, I'll talk some more about this a little bit later on. And making sure approving authorities like universities and school systems, those boards that run them have got to be on board from the beginning. you have to let them know, we're going to do this. We're going to hire an ESCO. We're going to do this different kind of project because they're not used to this. And again, I've seen these stop dead in the water because the authorities having jurisdiction, or AHO in English, they need to be on board with this from the beginning. So sometimes ESCOs will try to go around the state or the local government and hand you their contract. Not a good idea, right? Because usually they're a little one-sided. It makes it easier for the ESCO. You should use, again, there's a contract that is included in the SOEP documents. The U.S. Department of Energy also has a model set of instruments that's currently being revised. I know Laura, who's on the call, is one of the head people putting that together. And it's a compilation of best practices from a number of states, as well as owners reps like myself and ESCOs like Jesse and others that have a history of success of doing this. And we're trying to spread these documents around the whole country so that we don't have these problems anymore, right? We don't have time. Climate change is decimating our infrastructure. We need to get on board with this quickly. So some of the things you can do ahead of time, and again, I'm not going to spend much time on this. Get your utility bills, 3 years of utility bills ready electronically, not paper, not PDFs, right? In Excel format or CSV format. So when the ESCOs get on board, they request it in a request for information, or RFI, you have it to them in a few days, right? And usually there's pre-qual stuff, pre-qualification stuff that a good owner's rep can do for you to make sure that is all in place ahead of time. If you're already using the EPA Energy Star Portfolio Manager, that has outputs that you can just give right to the ESCO electronically, or post them on a Dropbox or something that will give you everything you need. You want to make sure you have sample bills, not just the amounts, so that they can see what tariff you're on, what rate you're on. If you have any deregulated costs that you're worried about, do you have a rate case coming up with your local utility? All of that stuff needs to be put out in front so that the ESCO understands, and you understand, because you're going to have people who are not used to looking at utility bills understand how you use utilities and where you're spending the money. Another good practice is collect a lot of technical data, what we call a technical facility profile. That's a description of your buildings. How old are they? What kind of air conditioning you have? What kind of lighting? What kind of controls? What kind of renovations have been done? Do we have old blueprints? Do we have electronic documents? Do we have as-built documents, right? That's fairy tales. Usually as-built documents are very hard to put your hands on, and they're usually not accurate anyway. But getting all the stuff ahead of time will really make your job and the ESCO's job easier when it gets to the investment grade audit section, right? Another partner you want to pick is this owner's rep. Like I've talked about this from the beginning. So we put some questions and some answers here. When do you need them? As early as possible. If you're thinking of doing a project like this, get somebody on board that understands this process intrinsically, that's got a lot of experience, that's going to be on your side of the table, helping you deal with the ESCOs, right? The ESCO community is very sophisticated, right? I worked for an ESCO in the 90s when we were inventing a lot of these things and trying to perfect a lot of these processes. And you want to be able to be on a level playing field so that you understand what you're buying and you become a good purchaser of this process, right? You don't want to go into this going, oh, I've never done this before. I've seen a lot of good projects fail or just get tabled because they didn't understand what they were buying, right? And owner's rep can help you do that. And what can they help you with? Almost everything, right? One of the things that I've seen is a great benefit is having an owner's rep train the owner's stakeholder group before they get started on any of this. So they're not learning as they go through the development process. That's a very painful process. Just like going from design build, it's just like that, right? What can they provide? Independent education and validation, right? And I've talked about this before. It really can help you understand this process, which is somewhat complex, as you're probably learning by now, right? How do you find them? It's not easy, especially in the islands, right? There's not a lot of people who do this. But again, you can go to the Department of Energy Services Coalition. They can give you input on folks that do this. And how do you pay for them? Typically, for the first 6 months, it's fee for service. You pay them like you would any other architect or engineer. Then when the financing gets put in place, you can borrow the money that you've already paid them, as well as all the money you're going to pay for pay the ESCO, the money you're going to pay your attorneys, your bond counsel, all that all gets borrowed into your financing. And then you can repay yourself. Wherever you took that money from, you can put that back into that fund. Then you get to pay the owner's rep, just like you're paying the ESCO through the year or two of construction that you're going to have, right? And here's a little white paper I wrote for U.S. Department of Energy 3 or 4 years ago about the benefits of using owner's reps. So another thing that the Department of Energy has done to really help state and local governments is put together an owner's rep course, right? We helped develop this along with a bunch of folks at US Labs, ESCOs, and others, a big stakeholder group. And again, I'm not going to get into this, but it gives you a lot of detail. It's an 8-module course. It's really well done, and you get a training certificate at the end of it. So it's a fantastic tool for anybody that wants to get involved in a performance contract, because it teaches you about the whole process, right? And a lot more detail that I'm able to do today. So the next thing, this is the most important decision you're going to make with one of these processes or one of these programs or projects, selecting an energy service company, right? The first step, work with your state agency, right? They've already got a pre-qualified list of 4 ESCOs, right? You want to work with them to help you put together interviews, right? They've already got the qualifications, all of that. Angel and others are going to be happy to share that with you. I recommend highly, anytime you do a project, interview the ESCO. And you're going to want to demand, I want the people who are going to be working on my project at the interview, not the guy in the fancy suit flying in from Miami, Milwaukee, wherever it's going to be. You want to have those people too. It's usually the high-level people, especially on the islands, right? Most of the high-level people are coming from the mainland, but who's going to be working for me locally? What engineering firms are they going to hire locally? What construction firms are they going to hire locally? And they usually want to know, who do you work with, right? Because the ESCOs, again, having done this myself on the ESCO side, I want to know who you like, who you trust, who knows your facilities, because the ESCOs are basically the general contractor here, right? So they want to make sure they're working with people that you know. So get all those people at the interviews. Make sure they're a good team. And it's all about the people, right? The shiny brochures are nice, but it's all about the people, right? As you have learned, right? I know that in Latin culture, that's the saying, I'm Irish, it's the same for us. Interviews are key. References are great, but the people are the most important. Understanding the markups, again, you probably already have that. Angel probably already has that. We don't have time to get into that, but it's very, very important. You're going to understand each markup, each ESCO charges things a little bit differently, right? And again, we can do a follow-up course and how that gets done. And there's things like diversity, safety factors, and the comfort factor. At the end of the day, am I comfortable with these people sitting across the other side of the table from me, right? Do I want them in my facilities? A financier is very similar, right? First step, talk to SOEP, right? Follow the same process with your financing people and bring them on as you're getting about halfway through the IGA. That's when the investment grade audit, that's when you want to make sure you've got a finance person in mind. So in the biggest next step, once you've selected your ESCO, the first step is signing an investment grade audit agreement with them. It's basically a study agreement. They're going to go out and start studying your facilities. And then at the end of that, come up with a report, investment grade audit report, and a proposal that says, here's what we found in your buildings. Here's all of the measures we think are going to make sense for you. And the way we run them, at least, there's a 30% submission, like a baseline submission, like you would do with schematics in a regular construction project. Then there's a 60% submission that's more like scoping document, much like you have with design development documents in normal construction. And then a 90% investment grade audit. That's really where you get the draft pricing, the draft plans for everything. We'll talk about this a little bit later. And it really follows what you see in normal construction, but in a way that allows you to learn really what's going on in your buildings, where you're spending all the money, and using the creativity, innovation of the ESCO community to help you come up with solutions. And they're putting these prices and guarantees on this, right? So you're getting to use the benefit of having companies that have got really good balance sheets that know how to do this working on your behalf, right? And as long as you're working as a team, these usually work out really, really well, right? And I've already talked about most of this before. So you want to work with them defining the scope of the measures. One of the things that's different about performance contract at normal construction, you want to have people deeply involved in the startup and commissioning, witnessing the commissioning and the measurement and verification, right? And these are the two things that really set performance contracting apart from normal construction, is commissioning and measurement verification, otherwise known as M&V, right? These become part of the investment grade audit. There's plans for each of these, and there's a whole list I'll give you in a few minutes, so that you're not hoping and thinking that, well, let's see how it all goes later on when things are getting built. You're going to know ahead of time exactly what the ESCO is going to have to do and what your folks are going to have to do, and how everything's going to be communicated. There's sample plans that go into this, sample documents for startup, commissioning, and everything else. So it really is thinking everything through ahead of time. So when you're there on site, you're not trying to think about it out loud when you're on site and like it's about to rain that afternoon, right? In the summer. So you want to make sure these things all get done ahead of time. And this is a great place to use your owner's rep to review everything before you give the okay for the ESCO to get started, right? So for measurement and verification, what is it, right? Measurement and verification, it's a process, right? It's sort of like LEED. People think LEED is a checklist. LEED is a process, right? Leadership, Energy, and Environmental Design. It's been around for 20 years now. M&V is the same way. You're measuring the performance and you're verifying the savings. Like I said earlier, whether you get the savings or not, the bank's going to want its money, right? So you need to make sure that this is going to be a robust process, right? And what we consider the gospel of this is the International Performance Measurement and Verification Protocol, right? This is what the ESCOs know by heart. We know by heart. And we train the owners folks on this, but usually it comes down to the owner's rep, your internal champion, and the ESCO is going back and forth on how these things are going to really get measured and verified during the investment grade audit, during construction, and then during the performance period, the 15-year period. And this is a live link for this IPMVP. Now these terms get bandied about a lot. Well, what comes down to in the contract, these are contractual terms. So everyone has to really understand them, right? And savings is one thing, right? And the ESCOs typically guarantee so many kilowatt hours of savings at a price that changes over time. There's an escalated rate that goes into this because we all know prices fluctuate over time. Everyone's going to agree to a rate, just like you agree to paying an interest rate on a loan over time. You're going to agree to an escalation rate on those utility costs over time, so that you understand that's the contracted savings, right? It's not what your utility bills actually say, because it could be a hot summer, you had a storm and you're unoccupied for 3 weeks, whatever the case may be. It's different than just looking at your electric bills, right? So we want to make sure that it's really clear. It's contractual savings. In the process, again, this goes from the RFP response. We'll make sure, working as an owner's rep or somebody in your, like Angel, there's a conceptual M&V approach. What are you looking for? In the investment grade audit, there's detailed M&V plans. During installation, there's various M&V activities like taking light level readings, right? Putting motor loggers on to see how long the air conditioning is running. During the performance period, the ESCO is going to do this again to say, yep, we said it was going to run 20 hours. Now it's running 10 hours because we put this control on it. Done. We've met all the requirements, right? So, and again, we don't have time to get into this in detail, but these are the 4 different options. That one of the main takeaways, it's like the difference between measuring a light bulb being on or off, or how long it runs, versus putting in all kinds of measures in your building, changing all the lighting, all the air conditioning, all the heating, all the windows, and you can't measure that on an individual basis. So that's where you use the meter, the utility bills, and a lot of really complicated math and engineering to measure it over time. All right. So you go from what we call retrofit isolation to whole building measurement, right? And I could spend hours talking about just that, but it's complicated. But this is the thing, the key to performance contracting success or failure. At the end of the day, when the ESCO spent their 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever it is, they're going to put together this audit and then a proposal, as long as you agree to everything, that includes all of this. And I've talked about all of this before. There's going to be the guaranteed savings. And I talked about this as a guaranteed maximum price. There's open book pricing that we always put into the RFP. So the ESCO knows, right, here's are going to be our engineering fees, our commissioning fees, our measurement verification fees. So do you know from the very beginning, right, they want this. Everyone wants this to be open book. And they're going to get the contractor pricing and apply all these numbers to it. So there's no playing around with the numbers for anybody, right? And it makes it for a much more collaborative process, and no one is arguing over price, right? And then they're going to provide a cash flow pro forma that shows from, during development, in construction, and then the 20 years or 15 years of performance, how the cash is going to flow. The energy services agreement, and again, we don't have time to get into a lot of details with this, but this is a way that everything gets encapsulated into an agreement that's written in plain English or in Espanol on the island, that's going to have all the terms and conditions, all the events of default, all the legal stuff, all the procurement stuff. If things go wrong, what happens? How are the bills going to get paid over time? There's not an appropriation clause. I talked about all the construction guidance. What's your permitting requirements? What's your hazardous waste requirements? If you find lead-based paint and asbestos and all of that, that's where it becomes much more like a construction agreement, but has services agreement embedded in it. So what's the ESCO's responsibilities going to be for the 15 years? What's the owner's responsibility going to be for those 15 years? That is another thing that absolutely sets performance contracting apart from normal construction. That sets this 15-year tail for everybody. So it's clear on what happens. And it's just like if you tell people you're going to sample, I remember this from college, sample 10% of the scores, 10% of the tests are going to be done, you bring your A game, right? You know that somebody's going to be watching this. So everybody does a good job from the beginning because they know 15 years of maintenance. Boy, I better watch those motors. Or the ESCO engineers, boy, I better make sure I model this correctly, right? So it works for both sides of the table. And it goes through the responsibilities of all the different parties, right? There's a bunch of schedules that are attached to this. Again, I won't go through this. But as you can see, this becomes a very sophisticated contract that helps the owner understand what their responsibilities are and what the ESCO's responsibilities are, right? So it allows you to hold the contractor's feet to the fire in a way you never get to before. And the way ESCO's are set up, they're happy to do that, right? When I worked for an ESCO, I was happy to sign a contract like this because I knew it made my profit and my markup worth it, right? Because it's usually slightly higher profit and markup that you see in normal construction, but boy, is it worth it because you get all this stuff done in a timely basis and you get all these guarantees that you just don't get. And honestly, you pay a lot more to do this in standard design bid build than you do in performance contracting. And Department of Energy has done multiple studies showing this, right? And I've lived it, believe me, on both sides of the table. And then all the different exhibits, all the stuff the attorneys love, most of the stuff that you don't really get to unless something goes wrong, but it's there to protect you. Then during construction, like I said, there's a lot of stuff that looks a lot like normal construction, but you get commissioning and measurement verification that's done in a guaranteed way, right? Fully documented front to back, planning, activities, reporting, right? And again, in a follow-up, we can go through some more of this in detail if you like. And I already talked about all this substantial completion. There's another thing that's really important, post-installation report. So just as the ESCO is finishing up all of their work, they put together a report that says, look, here's everything we've done. It looks like the savings are getting achieved even after their first month or two. We want to make sure everyone's good with it. And don't wait a year to find out whether the soul worked or not, right? And once you review and include this, and DOE pioneered this 20 years ago, and I brought this to all the states we work with. This makes everyone's life so much easier because then you go, okay, everything looks good. You sign off on the project acceptance, and then the bills start to come, right? And the ESCO starts the performance period phase. All right, and then there's the operations and maintenance. Again, we talked about this earlier. There's warranty support, post-construction measurement verification. And then there's a report the ESCO provides every year for the term, right? And again, it depends on your individual project. It could be 1 year, 2 year, 5 years, or 15 years. These are a great way to basically keep an eye on what's going on, especially if there's changeover in staff on either the owner side or the ESCO side. so that a new CFO comes in and, well, what is this $500,000 bill to Bank of America for? Oh, that's for your $5 million project at the school that you did 5 years ago before you were here, right? And here's a report showing that the ESCO is actually doing what they were supposed to do, or not, and here's how we had to resolve it, right? So this is really, really key. So to recap the steps, prepare, right? All these there's preparation steps. So when you get into the ESCO selection and IGA process, you're ready to go, right? And it's a much more effective and time efficient process. The investment grade audit gets done. Like I said, this is a 3 or 6 or 9 month process, depending on your project. The ESPC contract is ESA. The implementation, again, it starts to look more like construction, except it has this detailed, robust commissioning and M&V, and the post-construction or performance period process, then collect and maintain the data, right? And that part of it has always been a problem. So Department of Energy, with a lot of help from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, who put this together, created this eProject Express, right? eProject Builder originally for the federal market, then eProject Express. I was lucky enough to help them put some of this together and give them some input. This is an absolutely fabulous tool. So you can keep every single piece of documentation from these projects, and the ESCO will put this in for you, right? And depending on your contract, you can have this included in your contract. So you don't no longer have to go find something on a computer for somebody that like left the school district at the town. It all gets put into this free online database, right? And I've got some links in here for you to use. Highly recommend you look at this, and there's a bunch of training courses that are going to be coming up this year. I wish I had this 20 years ago. There's some more guidance here from Energy Services Coalition with a whole like university phase that you can do with various classes. And this has been a lot. I consider it, drinking from a fire hose, and we've got like 5 minutes left, 10 minutes left. But a lot of this gets done. $7 billion a year. It's been getting done for 50 years. There's all these model instruments now. There's a burgeoning industry of folks like us that do this third-party owners rep work. And here a bunch of resources for you. And again, I know this has been a lot of information. I apologize. It's a lot. But here you go. That's it. So thank you. Muchas gracias. I'm good. Are we doing questions and answers now or after?
No, let's wait and hold off on Q&A until after Jesse's presentation. And thank you, Chris. That was a really excellent presentation, providing a good overview of the fundamentals of ESPC for Puerto Rico. And now we'll turn things over to Jesse Wright with JCI, who can talk to us a little bit more about some island-specific case studies in ESPC.
Perfect. So, buenas tardes, Annette, Carlos, Edwin, Francisco, Frank, Jeanette, Joel, Joanna, Luis, Victor. Appreciate you all spending time. I'm going to give you a bilingual version. I'm not sure if you all have a preference with English and Spanish, but I know that we have some English speakers only. So I have the presentation in Spanish in written form, and then I'll be talking in English, pero también hablo español. Entonces, if you want me to say something in Spanish and you want me to repeat it, happy to do that. So let me share my screen. Oh, it says you cannot start share screen while others sharing. Let me see.
I just stopped sharing. It should be good.
You should be fine.
Perfect. All right. All right. Are you all able to see the screen?
Yes, I see the screen, Jesse. I see it.
Okay, perfect. So again, thank you so much. And I saw a few names on the list that I know there, but for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jesse Wright Cortez. I work for Johnson Controls in our Sustainable Infrastructure Division. And our team is dedicated to putting together these types of energy savings performance contracting. And when I was asked to come up with an example, I wanted to find an example that I thought that you all would resonate with and that had a lot of parallels to the situation in Puerto Rico. We have done a very large performance contract in Puerto Rico at Fort Buchanan. So it was around a $64 million project. And if you ever drive by Fort Buchanan and you see the big wind turbine and you see the solar panels, that was all part of our project. But the reason I decided against talking about that project is that project was a federal project. And I thought that the story of Hawaii, which is more of a state level project, and what their specific challenges were, had a lot more in common with Puerto Rico. And so I decided to use that instead. So I picked our project with the Hawaii Department of Transportation. And it's a little bit different than Puerto Rico. I know in Puerto Rico, we have DTOP with Secretaria Vélez, and then we have the Autoridad de Puertos with Secretario Pizá. In Hawaii, that is like one giant Departamento de Transportation. So like I'm sure many of you know, Hawaii is similar in geography to Puerto Rico. They serve 1.4 million. Puerto Rico has 3. They've got 6 primary islands and 2 smaller islands, which you know, similar to Puerto Rico, you have the main island and you have 2 smaller islands in Culebra and Vieques. And their transportation covers about 2,400 miles of highways, 15 airports, and 10 ports. And their funding source was limited to just the tariffs and fees that they collect at the airport and on the highways. So what were their challenges? Well, like Puerto Rico, they're remote. They're actually even more remote than Puerto Rico. They're 2,500 miles away from the mainland. And unfortunately, as we're talking, I'm not sure if you've seen the news, but they just got hit. Maui got hit with a hurricane right now in the past 24 hours. So similarly, you know, they're subject to natural disasters. And the other thing is, you know, they're dependent on fossil fuels. At the time that we started this project around 2013, 2014, and more than 90% of their energy came from fossil fuels. And their kWh rate is very similar to Puerto Rico. Today, it's 43 cents per kilowatt hour. I know Puerto Rico is like 30 something cents around there. So it's about 3 to 4 times more than the mainland. And similar to Puerto Rico, their governor, David Aishi, had set up a goal to get to 100% renewable energy by 2045. But they weren't sure how to get there and they had very limited funds. So, you know, knowing that the fees and tariffs that they collect pretty much just cover their day-to-day operations and maybe a little bit of capital projects, they wondered, how in the heck are we going to get to 100% renewables? So what was their solution? They did a public procurement for an ESPC. And like Chris talked about, you know, why they found this as a compelling solution was for a variety of reasons. And for one, you know, that's a very ambitious goal and it requires a lot of resources. And, you know, with a traditional capital project, you would have to come up with the capital to hire an engineer to do a design, where with the ESCO model, they were able to basically not have to put any capital up front to start conversations about a design. And similar to what Chris talked about, with a capital project, you have to obtain the capital first in order to fund it. Where with the ESCO model, you don't have to have sometimes any capital at all. You're often able to use savings to pay for it, or if you can combine capital. And with their public procurements, they were stuck with usually the lowest bid, which doesn't always provide you the best value. And oftentimes, because of the budget shortfalls in the past, they were stuck with having to split up projects into multiple phases. And then as they split up the project in multiple phases, they found that their own resources shifted jobs, people retired, new people came on board, you know, companies and their service levels changed, and it just was very hard to manage from a consistency standpoint. And that the warranty that came with those projects was very limited. And frankly, they assumed a lot of the risk. Whereas with the ESCO model, again, didn't have to put up capital. They allowed the ESCO to do the procurement on their behalf. It was one primary contractor that they had to deal with instead of having to work with a bunch of individual contractors. There was a long-term guarantee associated with it, and they shifted the risk. Instead of it falling on the Hawaii Department of Transportation, the risk fell on the ESCO. And, you know, primarily just to refocus, the funding part was major. So they were able to, well, I'll share with you throughout the story, we were able to basically take any savings that we generated from energy improvements and operating costs to pay entirely for the project, which, by the way, was $245 million for scale. And in Puerto Rico, this is all authorized under La Ley 19-2012. So how did we do it? Well, the first thing that we did was we worked with the Hawaii Department of Transportation to evaluate their 12 airports, their highways, and their ports to look for energy savings and operating savings opportunities. We then studied those same buildings to see what opportunities there were to put in renewable panels, placas solares and batteries, etc. Then we took a look at what funding they had available or didn't have available to see if we can make this project cash flow and make it happen. And then the last thing is we came up with an implementation plan to make it happen. So the first area that we found tremendous savings on was lighting. And we were able to replace 75,000 lights in the airport and retrofit them with LEDs. On the highways, we did more than 20,000 lights. And in the ports, we were able to do over 2,000 of those high mast lights and over 4,000 lighting retrofits. Aside from the lighting energy savings benefits, you can see on the left an example of some of the other benefits that it gave. It gave them significant better color, which, you know, from a working environment standpoint in an office setting or out in the streets is helpful. Same thing from a safety perspective. It also gave them the ability to control their lights, which previously they didn't have. And the end result was a 43% reduction in energy costs. And instead of them having to replace their lighting every 2.5 years, which is on average what they were having to do it, they only had to replace it every 10 years. And all of this was 100% guaranteed over the life of the project. In Puerto Rico, you can guarantee it up to 15 years, and Hawaii is up to 20 years. So 20 years, we're actually still on the hook for this project, and it's been about 10 years, just to give you an idea. Another thing as well, you know, when we did these lighting retrofits, because of the way the ESCO model worked, we were able to procure the lighting collaboratively with the input of their team to figure out what was the best vendors. So like Chris had indicated before, you know, things are open book pricing. We were able to show the vendors that we were able to select bids from, and we were able to say, hey, instead of this person, you know, it might be the lowest bid, it might not. Some of the LED lightings, as an example, if you go with lowest bid, it could be made in China or made from a manufacturer that might not be around in 10 years. And so, you know, through this model, we were able to select manufacturers that we know we could warranty over the long term and that were proven. The second area where we were able to generate some operating savings on this project was with air conditioning. And we were able to retrofit several chillers and go to their package units on top of the roofs and window units and make them significantly more energy efficient. We were able to install controls so that instead of their air conditioning being the same temperature the whole day in the whole building, we could detect if there is occupancy, or we could set up schedules to lower the use of air conditioning when people were not in the building, or you know, increase it in certain rooms if it was occupied, or decrease it in certain rooms. And this led to significant energy and operating cost savings. And again, you know, guaranteed long-term. One of the really exciting parts about this project was with respect to how much renewable energy was done. If you go to the Hawaii airport and you can see this photo, we were able to put a lot of solar, and we'll get into that in a second. But in addition to that, while we were doing the solar, we were able to use the savings to pay for other things that typically wouldn't be able to pay for themselves on their own. Like, for example, the roofs. So all these rooftop mounted solars, a lot of them required to replace the roof as well. And we were also able to take a look at the windows and either put hurricane impact windows or put more energy efficient windows. And we looked for areas in the building that were leaking air through the doors or through different cracks to be able to seal it to have better insulation. So this is another illustration of the solar that I was sharing before. You can see the image on the right. On top of the parking lots, we were able to get engineering and creative to put solar all on top of those, or on top of many of them, on top of the roofs of many of the terminals. In total, there was over 8,700 panels in the airport, 1,300 panels in the highways, and 2,500 panels in the ports. And it was of all types, from rooftop mounted to the parking station style, and to also ground mounted. So what was the end result? They were able to pay for $245 million worth of energy improvements without having to use their capital budget. And again, I won't repeat it, but you can see the list of what was done. That resulted in $680 million in total guaranteed savings for 20 years, which, like I said, we're still warranting 10 years later. And a 49% reduction in their electricity in the airport, and 43% reduction in electricity in the highways. While we did this, again, we tackled a lot of items that they were going to have to replace anyway in the next 5 to 10 years. We were able to evaluate which we could incorporate into the project. So they were able to do a lot of deferred maintenance items like the roofs and like equipment. And then the model was so successful that it's led to over $500 million of performance contracting that we've done in Hawaii. And it's led to decade-long plus relationship. And like Chris said, they're using, the whole state of Hawaii is using the performance contracting model, not just with Johnson Controls, but with a variety of different firms on the islands. And they're significantly closer to getting towards their goals. So that's it for my portion of the presentation.
Great, thank you so much, Jesse. Really appreciate that. If you do have questions for either one of our speakers here, for either our trainer or for Jesse, please feel free to add them into the Q&A box or the chat box, and we can respond to them. Since we do have some time here, I'd like to just kick things off with a couple of questions for you here, Chris. Obviously, the two recently passed bills, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, have provided a lot of money to states and territories for the purposes of making their economies cleaner and greener, to say. So given that there's a lot of money out there, what would you say to state agencies or folks in the mush market looking to maybe leverage some of these funds alongside ESPC? What would be some key things you'd want to have them remember?
You're on mute, Chris.
You're on mute, Chris.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, let me bring up this screen again. Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Bipartisan infrastructure law. All right, I lost my mouse. There it is. Two things. So eligibility, number one, right? So for this, the first one, the bipartisan infrastructure law, the way this money is getting dispersed is from U.S. Department of Energy to the state energy offices, which I think that's your office, I would assume, right? So it's done on a formula basis, so that this initial 500, 50 of it is competitive, 500 is formula award. And it's these energy efficiency conservation block grants, or ECBG grants. So the states got a bunch, however many million, depending on the size of the state or commonwealth. And then the top 10 cities or counties in each subdivision, political subdivision, got direct awards as well, right? So if you're San Juan or one of the other larger cities on the island, you've gotten money already, right? And you need to think about how you want to spend that and so on. Same thing with the schools. That's a bit more of a competitive thing. You need to put in a plan, and it's a whole much more complicated process. So the second thing is that, am I eligible for it? Right? Almost everyone is eligible. Any public entity is eligible in any state in the union for these grants. You either get a direct award if you're big enough, or you have to talk to the state energy office, and they're each having to come up with a plan of how to distribute the money. So my recommendation is think about what kind of projects you probably already have been wanting to do, right? Apply to the state for some of this money. Use it as seed money, right? Don't take your $500,000 and go buy a new chiller, right? Take your $500,000, hire an owner's rep, right? Get an RFP put together to hire an ESCO and use that as seed money, so that, because typically what happens, you may have $500,000 to do a chiller plant upgrade. That chiller plant upgrade is going to cost you $2 million, right? Or $1 million at least. And you don't have enough to do it anyway. So don't half do it. Use that money as seed money. Like I like to say, like a mortgage, right? No one puts down $500,000 in cash on a house unless you're really rich, right? You borrow the money, but sometimes you save, you put a bunch down as a down payment. So use this money as a down payment on these things. And depending on when they get paid, like the IRA money gets paid afterwards, right? You have to plan for that. You have to have like a bridge loan. A lot of the finance companies now are coming up with tools to be able to fund between the time that the construction starts and the financing comes in and when that money is going to be paid out, right? So that's the two things. Plan around using this as a down payment, not the funding source, right? Just another way to get some money as an additional revenue stream, because anything you can get like that, utility incentives, it can reduce the amount you have to borrow, right? And go on these links and learn as much as you can, right? The more you learn, the more you're going to get. Just like anything else, any rebates that come out, the earlier you are. Like the early bird gets the worm. It's the same with a lot of these grants. And this direct pay one, again, I could talk about this for a long time, but this direct pay one is a game changer, because now you can afford to do what Jesse was showing you on those rooftops in Hawaii, right? And it's a great example because it's very applicable to Puerto Rico. Solar and battery storage is going to be your salvation on that island, right? It really is. Make your building super efficient, but you put solar that's prepared for hurricanes and battery storage, it won't be like what happened after Maria, right? With all these thousands of people dying, that was a tragedy. And this is a way to pay for a chunk of it. And if you're in an underserved community, like most of Puerto Rico is, I don't know the details of how it works, but I'd love to help you with it. You get more money, right? You get 40%, 50% paid for by the federal government. So these two things are a way to help you put together a well-planned project that's got supplemental funding so that you don't have to borrow quite as much, right? Or you borrow as much and you get other things done that would have to get value engineered out, right? Which is neither. You end up with what I call catnap, the cheapest available technology necessary to avoid prosecution, right? That's what happens in a lot of normal public construction. ESPC gets you away from all of that stuff. So sorry, it's a long answer, but it's a complex subject.
But it is really important too. I think it's also important to note, with the grants for the public school facilities, is that I believe in the statute, it also says that the secretary is going to have to prioritize applications that leverage performance contracting.
Yes, it does.
In order to,
Yep.
to really kind of pursue deeper retrofits at the schools. So that's something to keep in mind as well if you're considering applying for those funds. So I think another question for you here, Chris, is that, I think when we're talking about ESPC, I think, a lot of times with this training, we've been thinking about it in terms of one building. Is it possible for buildings or facilities to really be aggregated into a single project in order to get scale? So could you, for example, if you're an agency that owns multiple buildings throughout the island, can you aggregate those into one contract? So does each building need to meet the savings guarantee, or is the guarantee for aggregate performance?
Thanks, Sam. That's a great question. And I'm a big believer in go big or go home, right? And with these projects are just like that, because it's proven, right? It's a proven process. Don't pick, if you're like an enterprise agency, like a Department of Corrections, Department of Health, right? Department of Education that's got multiple schools. Don't do a building and just try it out for 2 years, right? You don't have time for that, right? This is already getting done. Get yourself some good help. Talk to Angel, his office, and do a sensible project, right? Don't do absolutely everything if you don't have the staff to be able to manage it, right? But what you can do is look at all of your buildings to start at a high level, prioritize the things that make the most sense. Like, they did that in Hawaii, right? I watched that great video, Jesse, that Chuck had made about that process, the program rather, and it was multiple phases, right? You can't do everything at once. So like, don't put the solar in first. Number one, don't ever do that, right? Make your buildings efficient first, reduce your load, and then you design and put on the solar, or at least do it at the same time, because then you can phase it, right? Take things that are in the worst shape, your really critical assets like hospitals and schools, right? Things that are designated places of refuge in your communities, do them first. So you're prepared for the next storm, right? And the lessons learned you get from that, you can apply to other places. We're doing this for the water company in El Salvador right now, right? And we're putting together an ESCO RFP, and that's exactly what we're doing. We're going to take 20 or 40 of the 400 water stations and do them first, because it's never been done in El Salvador, right? So, and they're going to learn from that, but that's already like a $20 or $30 million project, right? That's all they can handle. So that's my two recommendations. Do as much as you can handle, take those lessons learned, and don't overburden your staff. We're already overburdened, right? And get as much help. Get an owner's rep, even a separate project manager if it makes sense. But yeah, a lot of lessons have been learned, and you can learn again a lot from these sort of webinars and other things, follow up from DOE and Energy Services Coalition and NASEO, and really learn as much as you can before you embark on one of these.
And Angel, I believe you have a question or comment. You're on mute, I believe.
Yeah. Just a comment for the 10 participants. Siéntase en la libertad de escribir alguna pregunta que tengan en español. Nosotros se la traducimos para que puedan pues, clarificar cualquier duda, tanto de lo que Chris presentó y lo de case study de Jesse. Así que si quieren la pueden ponerle en el chat en español. I have a question, Chris, in regards to you mentioned that most problems in the ESPC projects are due to bad measurement verification.
Mm-hmm.
So do you recommend that is it nice to have or a must for the government agency to have a measurement verification professional in order to evaluate the effectiveness of the performance of the ESPC projects?
Yes. And in general, right? That's the general answer is yes. So as you know, we talked about this on our prep call, the Association of Energy Engineers, right, which is a global organization now, which has certifications for various different things. Like I'm a certified energy manager. I'm a professional engineer, but I'm a certified energy manager through AAE for the past 20 years. And I'm a certified measurement and verification professional, right? And so there's only, I think, 100 certified measurement and verification professionals in the whole country, something like that. There's not a lot. But getting that designation really helps, right? You don't have to have it, but it really helps. But getting somebody either internally certified, or if you're going to hire an owner's rep, that's something, if you're going to send it an RFQ for an owner's rep, put that in there. It's either a recommendation or a requirement, because this really is, it's a very niche sort of specialty to have. And again, the ESCOs are experts at it. They have to be, right? Because that's how they make their money, or they don't, right? And again, having lived on Jesse's side of the table, I know deals that I've got involved in after the fact that the company I worked for built and didn't do a good job. I had to answer for it, right? And nobody likes that, right? So the answer is yes, in general, but that's the context behind it.
Right. Jesse, I have a question for you. There's some many revenue structure, and the most common is the share savings between the ESCO company and the clients. Is there any other structure that would be used as a revenue for the ESCO other than the share savings?
Well, I would say that in general, when we approach an ESCO project, we try to get creative as necessary to help make the project work. So the first place that you would want to start with is with the savings that you talked about. You know, how much savings can this project on its own generate? We would look at what existing capital is available, whether it's federal dollars that are out there through our grants team, or, you know, state dollars, or what kind of incentive and rebates programs. And then we'd work with, you know, the CFO to see from a financing standpoint, what are their preferences? What is their capacity to take on debt? And like Chris was indicating earlier in his presentation, there's creative ways to fund and finance. We want to start with the least complicated as much as possible to make it straightforward. But if necessary, Angel, yes, there's a variety of creative ways where you can finance. But keep in mind that, and it's been my personal experience, that the more creative it gets, it tends to be, there's a little bit of a premium on it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. If I could follow up on that. So the traditional way of doing a performance contract is not shared savings, right? It's guaranteed minimum savings, like I said in my presentation, right? There used to be, I had a slide about shared savings, but I took it out because we had too many slides. That's how it used to get done at the very beginning of this whole industry in the 1980s. And I worked for one of the ESCOs that pioneered this, called the HEC. And that turned out to be a problem, because unless you can absolutely control what goes on in the facilities, you can't guarantee those fluctuating savings, right? And so it makes it very difficult to finance something when the value fluctuates over time, right? Just look at the stock market. If you were able to pick stocks, right, we'd all be billionaires and have private islands, but we're not, right? So it's the same with performance contracting. So the model changed, and Department of Energy and most states, they don't do any shared savings anymore. Everything is guaranteed minimum savings, right? When you switch to this energy as a service, as I described, right, and that becomes more of a shared savings model, right? And that can fluctuate, but that's a much more sophisticated financial instrument than a performance contract, right? It's less of a mortgage and more of a operating agreement, where that firm actually owns the light fixtures, owns the chillers, owns the boilers and all of that. And you're getting the light and the heat and the cooling. That's it, depending on how much you use per month. So it's very, very different. I just want to make sure it's clear.
Great. So I think we have 5 minutes left. So I think another time, I think we have one more question. Time for
Sam, we have a question on the chat.
Oh, great.
It's from Annette Ramirez. In the case of call 3, that's from our side, we are passed through ASC managing federal funds for ANC, municipalities and NGOs. And ESCO funds be used as a supplement funding?
So if I understood the question, so
you can go to the Q&A, to the chat.
Okay.
From Ramirez.
Okay, I think,
I can take a stab too, whenever you're.
I can't see it, but oh, Q&A, there we go. In case of, there it is. COR3, we are a pass-through agency managing federal funds for agency. Yes, so, if you're getting federal funding, and this is like virtually every state in the US, including the Commonwealths of, Puerto Rico, Guam, the other islands and so on in the Pacific, you can use those federal funds, however you're allowed to use them. And if you've got, say, capital money for renovations, right? And this is what happens a lot, right? States get so much money to do, fixing buildings and repairing operations and maintenance, and usually have very big deferred maintenance backlogs. What you get from the federal government is never enough. You can use either this other federal money, I was talking about the ECBG money from the bipartisan infrastructure law, or the financing you're going to get. And again, it's not from the ESCO. It's going to be from the financier you partner with to pay for the project, right? And they'll actually pay the ESCO and you're going to pay them back, right? So like I was talking about earlier, if you get some money, my example about the $500,000 for the chiller, that's your federal money you're getting, and you really need $1 million or $2 million to build that chiller plant or do the retrofit of the plant. That's when this financing and the ESCO who's doing the work with the financier paying for it all, that's a perfect way to supplement that existing funding. There used to be a problem with it, the color of money issue, we call it in the federal space, but that's been eliminated. Does that answer the question? Thank you, Annette.
Okay, so it looks like we are about at time for this training. So I just want to maybe wrap things up here by saying, big thank you to both our trainer, Chris, and our guest speaker, Jesse, for their excellent presentations today. I know I definitely learned a lot about performance contracting myself. If you do have any additional questions, I believe we posted both of their contact information on the slides, so feel free to reach out to them. We will also be sending around a recording of this training to the Puerto Rico Energy Office, who can send it around to you all. So that way, if you would like to forward it on to any colleagues that may not have had time to reach out to and attend the training, you're welcome to do so. If you have any additional follow-up questions, please send them to either myself or Angel, and we can get them to the trainer or Jesse and make sure those get answered for you. So with that in mind, I want to just wish you all a excellent rest of your day and week, and hopefully you have a safe hurricane season and get through the rest of the summer.
Yeah, Sam, thank you, NASEO, thank you, Chris, Jesse. It was very useful. So I expect this is the first one of expecting for many others. So as long as we get more into the details of the ESPC project, we will contact you and share more info. Very valuable. So I appreciate it a lot from our office. Thank you all.
All right, thank you, everybody. Have a good rest.
Employee.
Yeah.
Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you. Gracias.
Saludos.